I see it.
All right, very good.
Are we ready to get going? Oh, you lost it.
I think
Oh,
so.
lost Ben.
Uh-oh. Oh, no. Well,
We'd like to start with introductions while we're waiting for him.
sure, we can do that. Good evening, everyone. I'm Marianne Upton. I'm a partner at Design Lab, and I'll be the principal in charge for this project. And my particular role will be adaptive strategies lead. I am particularly interested, and my passion is in breathing new life to historic structures and interiors and finding ways to sympathetically lead them into new life. I am an active member of the Association for Preservation Technology, and I'll actually be presenting our work at this year's national conference, doing the master plan for the McKim building of the Boston Public Library. So Ben, we're just doing intros while you were logging back in. We skipped ahead a little bit. Lisa, do you want to introduce yourself while Ben's queuing that up?
Good evening. I'll let you, oh, there I am. So I'm Lisa Giersbach. I'm a landscape architect and partner and principal at G2 Collaborative. I had a small office of passionate landscape architects. And while we work at all scales of landscape design, the majority of our projects are collaborating closely with municipalities on public and civic projects throughout Massachusetts. We worked with Design Lab on the Concord Museum that you see here, the Kearney Library at UMass, and with his team most recently at the Somerville West Branch Library. In my 20 years of practice, I've been fortunate to have worked on over 10 library projects, and one of my earliest actually with Bob Miklos back in 2004 at the Needham Public Library. In all of our work, we look to create landscapes that support community program that are accessible and inclusive to all, and in the end, really create wonderful settings for engagement.
Great, and we'll work our way backwards. Bob, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm founder of Design Lab Architects, and our team over the years has programmed, designed, developed over 25 libraries for private institutions, educational institutions, and civic clients. In my own career, I was architect for the restoration of the Carnegie era library for the Boston Public Library for Mayor Menino, and shortly after that time led the complete restoration and integration of technology at the Boston Athenaeum. In that same era, I had the good fortune to work on a study for the expansion of H.H. Richardson's Ames Free Library, which was very much a model and we're sure was known by your architect for the Randall Library. So we love your building and your site, and actually the complexity of it. It is quite a puzzle, but we're confident that it can be transformed into a really vibrant community library that leverages the historic legacy.
And last but not least, Ben.
Yes, thank you, and apologies for that little technical glitch there. But hello, everyone. Thank you again for having us join you all this evening. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Ben Utes, and I'll be working alongside Marianne and Bob in a library planning capacity. Over the past 15 years, I've had the pleasure of collaborating with several distinguished public and higher education library clients. Most recently, and for nearly the past 7 years, I've been collaborating with the city of Somerville to reposition their 100-year-old West Branch Library, which we'll be sharing more about a little later. I've also led planning projects with Brandeis, library planning projects, with Brandeis University, UConn, and realized a transformative renovation of the Claire T. Kearney Library at UMass Dartmouth, which won an American Institute of Architects and American Library Association Honor Award.
Great. And so just to backtrack a couple slides there, Ben, to our lead in, just a little bit about our firm. Design Lab Architects was founded in 2005. We have a studio of 18 designers in Boston's Fort Point Channel neighborhood. And our mission is to help cultural, institutional, and educational clients transform and enhance the communities that they serve. And this means that we have the ultimate pleasure of working with many clients to refresh and reimagine their libraries. Recently, our work at the Providence Public Library was featured in the 2020 Library Design Showcase in American Libraries magazine by the ALA. And as Bob and Ben maybe mentioned, we've been working together with our two partners for over 13 years, and we're really excited to share those credentials with you this evening. So our portfolio contains a depth of experience in community and public library design, as well as extends into academic library planning as well. And we believe that working at the forefront of education and understanding the needs of upcoming generations affords us some unique insights in our public library work as well. Our team has successfully delivered many projects through the public process, specifically within the requirements of the Chapter 149 delivery system. That includes work for DCAM, MSCBA, as well as the City of Boston, as well as other towns and cities. The majority of these have been achieved in partnership with our cost estimator, Frank Vansler, who we've asked us to join us for this pursuit. And he has served in a unique role as owner's project manager for many cities and towns. So we think this long history together kind of brings a unique insight when it comes to the cost estimating part of the project. We have a depth of experience renovating, preserving, adapting historic structures. Many of these are state and nationally listed buildings, and we understand well the intricacies of reviving them. And with each, we have really elevated the character of the original building while adapting them to new and dynamic programs that are needed, as well as contemporary energy standards.
At Design Lab, we operate within a philosophy that we call critical stewardship, by which we celebrate and leverage the past for tomorrow. It is an approach to design that is based on the universal responsibility to history and the environment, as valued through the lens of community. Critical stewardship reflects that the architecture of today is part of a historical and environmental continuum of which we are all a part. We understand the full range of past circumstances that have led us to the moment of the project, as well as the full range of possibilities that could emerge from it. And as such, we are the stewards to responsibly understand a building's past in order to reposition it for the future. Just another step in the building's ongoing evolution. One component of the building's past that we think still resonates today is from a dedication to the children's room in 1968, in which a quote reads, "If Stowe owes a debt of gratitude, it is to Mary Warren for creating a living library geared to the growing needs of an alive community." We think there's an opportunity to continue with this thought in the next chapter of Randall Library's evolution, creating a living library for the next generation of Stowe residents.
So tonight we will begin with our understanding of Randall Library as you presented it in the materials and from the walkthrough, and in particular your needs and aspirations. And then we'll share a more detailed case study to showcase our relevant experience and also give you a sense of the process that we hope to go through together with you. And then we'll explore some particular opportunities that we've begun to hint to and think about in our proposal response. And then finally, we'll leave ample time for your questions. But please do feel free to interject or interrupt if you have questions as we go through the presentation.
So we think that you're all very fortunate that the town of Stowe has retained its essential rural and bucolic character and the legacy of its most important civic landmark, the Randall Library. The George Gilman Adams Design Library is a remarkable example of Romanesque architecture. It captures the essential elements modeled after H.H. Richardson, such as the large entry arch combined with tower sitting prominently on a hill. Adams cleverly adapted his version of this style that is much more domestic and comfortable in scale. Nearly 150 years later, the Randall Library is a landmark the residents can still be proud of, and the sentiment shared at the centennial celebration at the library can still be felt today.
This existing site itself poses some challenges in being bound tightly on 3 sides by the existing roads. Space for parking is an issue, and something that you pointed out, finding sites that are back of the house enough for things like dumpsters and things that don't want to be out on view. The front entrance, I think, being pushed to Common Road feels tight. And it could be made more generous for accessibility and to create a gathering space at your front door. At the historic entry on Liberty Hill, vegetation is incredible, it's just overgrown, and it really obscures the beauty of the historic facade and gives no sense that there's the lower courtyard or amphitheater to the left, in this image on the upper left, and the roof deck to the right are obscured. And one other opportunity that I think we would start to maybe look at might be, because the site is so tight, looking to adjacent open spaces like the common or the meadow beyond the library to engage with either visually or potentially physically.
And while the 1975 addition did provide access to the building, as was noted in the niche civil engineering report from 2012, we're not absolutely sure it's in complete compliance here today. But having said that, we see the opportunity with a gently sloping walk, 1 in 20 without rails, to create a much gradual and elegant entry, both at the lower level and potentially even up Library Hill, reopening the original library entry as an accessible entry as one option. We understand the challenges that you've identified. I think a significant one is ease of navigation and orientation for users of the library. There is a real disconnect between the 75 spaces and the historic building, but yet we see a great opportunity to make that a kind of seamless orientation and to actually better program uses and programs throughout the 2 spaces. We are familiar with the reports from 2012 by Rome Guardacino, Dr. Judith Selwyn, and Niche Engineering, and these are consultants we have worked with throughout the years. So we appreciate the site drainage issues, water leaks, need for masonry and window and roof repairs. And while these seem like onerous challenges, they're very familiar in I would say all of our work with historic buildings. We see the enormous potential and possibility here to fully expand the needs for the community, creating dynamic new learning spaces, spaces for cultural enrichment, access to technology, and engagement with the community.
Throughout our work, we have seen the deep need for community libraries and the positive impact that they can have. And something that spans the past, present, and future is how Randall Library stands as a community hub. And your vision for its future really excites us and aligns with our mission. And we just wanted to talk a little bit about how the role of community libraries has evolved really since the major revision of Randall in the 1970s. And we've seen a shift from readers being kind of more static to being more active learners. And an analogy that we really love is one comparing it to a grocery store model where patrons really come to select resources and consume them on their own, to one that's more like a library as a kitchen where many ingredients are mixed. The environments are there for dynamic collaboration. It's about creating something, and ultimately is a place for community to come together. And we appreciate specifically the list of needs that you've identified in the RFP, which we've summarized briefly here. And we really agree that these are very important and familiar components to any thriving library. For instance, you pointed to a need for dedicated space for teens and young adults to have their own area to work together for quiet study, to do research, and try new programs. You've also pointed to the need for a fun and engaging place for children and their families to go, and that's certainly something we've integrated into our recent work. And of course, there's always the need for quiet study space, areas for adult readers and researchers, and we certainly have some very handsome spaces that can be revived to support these uses. In our work, we've also seen the need for flexible education spaces that can serve different user groups and age types and different kinds of learning. These could be reservable rooms for different modes, programs, and community events. So it would really be kind of striking a balance between specificity as well as changeability in the range of programmings that we might present. And finally, you've also pointed to a need to address staff workspace and break rooms to support the librarians in their work delivering services to the community. And of course, these are really important to make sure that everything happens the way that it needs to. There's a flow, and your staff are well supported to support the community. So as you see, we've definitely integrated these kinds of spaces into our work, and we see them as crucial components of the reimagined Randall Library. So now we'll turn our attention to some recent experience through a kind of mini case study, again, hoping to highlight not only the results of that project, but also talk a little bit about process with you.
Excellent. Okay, so we wanted to share a bit more about our experience working with the city of Somerville to renew their 1909 neoclassical, our Carnegie era West Branch Library. Which has been a civil landmark in the Davis Square neighborhood for over 100 years, much more dense, of course, than Stowe, but a lot of similarities in terms of repositioning a library for the next generation. Davis Square is a host of several vibrant community events, including Porch Fest, the Honk Festival, and Art Beat. And while the West Branch Library sits proudly on the edge of this vibrant setting and was still loved by the community, the building fell into a period of complacency where no improvements were made and little maintenance occurred, resulting in a tired series of spaces in various states of disrepair. We began our process with the city's librarians, librarian trustees, their capital project team, and their operations and maintenance department with a concept design effort focused on developing a vision for their future library and right-sizing the program to meet the community's needs. So to start off that process, we posed a series of visioning questions and prompts in various forms, including community meetings seen here, as well as through online platforms like the City's Somerville by Design website, and even social media outlets through the library's Facebook page and Instagram accounts and Twitter account as well. And just a brief sort of side note here, during the past year, as we've embarked on the master plan update to the Boston Public Library, in the midst of the pandemic, we were able to successfully shift to an all virtual model for this type of engagement, hosting community input presentations on Zoom, kind of like we are now, but then transitioning to smaller breakout rooms for conversation and feedback. So it was much more about creating a sense of dialogue and conversation. So from this, getting back to the West Branch process, from that early visioning effort, we identified a series of emerging themes, priorities, and needs, and organized them into a series of categories. In this example that you see here, programs and resources, exterior and landscape, and operations. And I'm sure many of the things on screen here align with issues and goals that you all have outlined. We then hosted another series of community meetings, some of which were actually on site at the library, where we presented various strategies to achieve both building and site goals at different levels of intervention, and then sought input and feedback from community members. From that effort, we developed a series of design options, which we referred to as a menu, to our core stakeholder team and building committee. And each option achieved various visioning goals and priorities, from a smaller achieving some approach like scheme A on the left, to a larger achieve most approach to this, as you see in scheme C to the right. We clearly outline the programmatic spaces within each of those schemes in relationship to one another. So we could see where the growth and sort of retraction was, making sure that the highest priority program spaces, for example, in this instance, a maker space was achieved in all schemes, regardless of the scheme's overall size. And then we clearly understood the overall size and usable program area for each scheme, and were able to compare them to one another to understand the pros and cons.
In terms of programming, it was critical to understand also how the outdoor spaces would work to support the library's program goals. We looked to kind of test fit program to understand how these spaces could be used for multiple purposes. For example, can a courtyard be used for parking on some days and then transform into a space for festivals and tented events? These are some early diagrams that looked at a range of uses, from large gatherings to small, from parking to food trucks to various festivals. And the desire was to make the spaces work both when they're just a small number of people as well as when there are larger events. With a small site, it's critical to think about how these spaces can serve dual purposes. In the end, we had to weigh many different uses for the small urban site. So you can see this, we ended up with what Ben showed as our B scheme. But here you can see on the right-hand side in the plan, the new addition on the far right, with a new accessible main entrance. We worked hard to avoid having to create ramps. In some ways, at a much smaller scale, this building was created very high, much like your library is up on a hill. And so it was a challenge to try and find ways to get in accessibly without creating handicap ramps with rails, but to create sloped, gentle sloped walks that could also serve as gathering spaces. The historic facade was completely renovated. We created a new civic plaza that really showcases the historic building and welcomes people to gather directly off the sidewalk, providing ample space for 1 or 2 people, or hosting bands for one of the many music festivals in Davis Square. And at the rear of the building, with a very small space, it was clear that the spaces had to perform, again, double duty. One large plaza with singular paving material is carefully divided to accommodate parking and a garden space for larger events. It creates one large open space. So critical to the success of the space also is the location of the garden off the community room and stage that engages that whole back space. You can see on the upper left-hand slide. So having complete direct access to that space, which really becomes a vital kind of outdoor room for the library.
Excellent. Okay, so with both the visioning goals established and programs options understood and site strategies outlined that Lisa just described, we then incorporated them into our cost model. And we started by identifying what we refer to as core costs, here highlighted in yellow. And these are building costs that must be addressed regardless of program needs or visioning goals. Some of which might include building code upgrades, accessibility improvements, envelope improvements, and building system replacement. On top of these core costs, we then consider what we refer to as a menu of optional improvements or program spaces and categorize them into a series of buckets. These could be, like we've organized them here, site and landscape, interior improvements, or even sustainability objectives. We can then look at each component within those categories and package them in different ways to achieve desired outcomes at various levels of intervention and different cost points. So with this cost model established, we'll be able to review each scope category and facilitate conversations with the building committee and appropriate stakeholders to discuss potential paths forward. And then we also revisit the cost model at critical points along the process and during design to make sure that we're still on track. And as Mary Ann mentioned at the beginning, we do have a very long-standing relationship with our cost estimator, Frank Vansler, and have successfully completed dozens of concept design efforts like this and even full building projects together. Frank understands our process intimately. He knows it inside and out, and we're confident that it will be immensely valuable to all of you as you consider the future of Randall Library. So we just wanted to share a few of the results of this process. You'll note sort of finished photography on the left and then smaller existing images on the right in this next series of slides. So for the city of Somerville, the process resulted in a project that was right sized from both programmatic and budget perspectives, achieving the majority of the early established visioning goals and programmatic needs, including, as you see here and as Lisa described, a universally accessible route to a new deferential entry pavilion. The entry pavilion doubles as an informal community gathering space that can host book sale events, informal readings, small performances, and similar events, with the potential to spill outdoors to a rear garden, as Lisa also described, was designed to support a variety of events and programs. Within the building on the main level, a new elevator was strategically inserted and new openings were created to connect discreetly and seamlessly blend the new and old spaces. In the trio of historic spaces, the entry hall, sort of on axis here in the center with the two flanking reading rooms, were sensitively restored as quiet reading rooms with new lighting, technology, and restored finishes. And lastly, one of the lower level spaces, it was completely replanned. It was actually once the children's room, and we kind of flip-flopped that. We moved children's up to the upper level. And then we replanned the lower level to support new programs and stack spaces.
Well, thanks, Ben and Lisa, for walking us through that. So now we'd like to take a little bit of time here and then we'll wrap up just to explore some opportunities. So what you'll see are just some initial reactions and musings. Obviously, we haven't had the benefit of really getting to know you all, but so these are just some very preliminary responses and sketches, but hopefully you'll see some seeds of what might be, what could be. And again, this is just a way of showing you sort of some of our communication tools and how we might work through ideas together with you.
Good. Okay, so we wanted to start by sharing what we think could be a relatively modest intervention. And we actually think there's opportunity to utilize the footprint of the 1975 addition to extend a new addition up vertically in line with the main level and its roof, creating more usable space on the upper level. This strategy might also be combined with a smaller addition on the lower level above the existing amphitheater to expand the lower level footprint and support a more robust children's space. This strategy could also seeks to leverage the historic spaces on the main level of the existing building as quiet reading rooms or small meeting rooms, while also improving building entrances and access to the street and patron parking that Lisa will describe.
Some of the nice opportunities here with extending the second floor addition would be looking at the creation of a garden court on the outdoor terrace, potentially having a green roof, which would be sustainability, which would benefit your sustainability, as well as creating some really vital kind of outdoor gathering space there, as you can see, sort of similar to the green roof on the left-hand side. And I think we would also look to sort of improve accessibility at the front door. Again, I think the idea of not having handrails and handicap ramps, but sloping walkways and sort of expanded spaces that provide space for people to stop and gather would be essential. And then finally, at the back of the library, are there ways that we can take advantage of some of the adjacent spaces, even if it's just visually to connect to the adjacent meadow of the church?
Has been noted on this particular option. We were exploring, maintaining the lower level entry, and with its improved exterior expression, I think that we could imagine extending that to the interior with a much more open and welcoming circulation desk, potentially having an info commons and technology area adjacent. We imagine, and I think you've described the possibility as well for a possible kind of expansion eastward. In this scheme, we were exploring the idea of potentially co-locating the children's and young adult destinations on one floor. There are advantages and disadvantages to that. And as Ben already mentioned, we are seeing here on the plan the location of the potential children's room addition. On the upper level, as Lisa was pointing to, we think really improving that terrace with some greenery would be of great benefit, and potentially the browsing area could be adjacent to that. It could share views to that improved garden court or to the meadow. We imagine better interior connections between the two wings of the building as supported by a shared core. Here we've spotted it sort of at the seam between the two structures that would hold the restroom and the elevator and potentially a new stair. And of course, we would leverage the wonderful historic character of the existing, the oldest part of the library for quiet reading rooms and meeting rooms.
Okay, so in this example, we consider a similar strategy where the 1975 footprint is expanded vertically to increase usable space. But we also consider a new addition that is added to the lower level, creating a new sort of community pavilion or meeting room addition with a dedicated entrance on the northeast portion of the site right from the street. We also considered repositioning the original historic entrance with landscape improvements as the primary or perhaps second entry to the library.
Yeah, I think interestingly similar to the restoration that happened at the West Branch Library, that the restoration of the front entry would allow that to become much more used and bring attention to and use hopefully to both the terrace as well as the amphitheater, the sunken amphitheater. And there are ways that we could see actually making that amphitheater more inviting in terms of having a space that, for instance, like the amphitheater shown here, where we've looked at creating turfed treads or seating so that they could become casual spaces for people, but also function to help with program and outdoor events. As well. And I think we've mentioned the idea of having the lower entrance become, provide spaces like that would be sort of like a garden corridor, a space that would allow people to come in and to stop and gather at the front entrance there.
So in this scheme, we're exploring potentially locating the young adult space on the lower level of the original building, making it a little bit more of a secluded destination, which could be nice for that patron group. And as you're also seeing the meeting room addition along Common Road, I think the benefit of that location is that it could potentially have be accessible after hours. So it could be an amenity even if the library is closed. And similar to the first scheme, you're seeing some ideas about where a core could be located and a potential location of the info common and technology area. And then as Lisa mentioned and Ben touched on, this scheme really offers the opportunity to reopen the original front door and celebrate that as a primary entrance. And similar to the first scheme, I think really the original library lends itself to those kind of quiet reading room and small meeting room uses. And then here we see the children's library perched on the upper level, so it could actually spill out into the new outdoor terrace for story time and really share a wonderful vantage point with that main entry and be convenient to that way in. So again, these are just some very preliminary thoughts and musings. And I think with that, we're reaching kind of the end of our formal presentation. And I think as a segue into the Q&A, we would really appreciate just a conversation with you all so we can hear about maybe what you're most excited about as part of this project. What are the things that you most appreciate about Randall Library that you'd certainly want to see protected and amplified, and maybe there's something that you'd like to see happen at the library that doesn't happen today. So with that, we'll conclude, and hopefully you can share your thoughts, and then we certainly welcome your questions as well.
See, everyone's jumping up and down to start. Anybody want to say anything?
So I have a quick question. I'm curious about the footprint for the Somerville Library. Was there any land added, or did you literally just take advantage of what was there?
We only had the land that was there. It's a very small lot, and the front was completely enclosed by fencing originally, except for the front walk that led to the historic entrance, and the back was used primarily for parking. And then there was sort of residual space that was sort of unprogrammed and just open space. There were no doors going out to the back or any way of accessing it except for sort of walking around the building.
And the need for the public
Sorry,
space.
go ahead, Lisa. Sorry, you were saying something else.
Oh, that's okay. I'm sorry. I'm just curious about the cost estimation and how close it came to the finished experience.
So then this was a question about Somerville Library and the cost.
Yeah, so the cost estimate came in just about on target. You know, it in the end, it was estimated to be around a $10 million project. In bids came in at the time, when this was the fall of 2018. The industry was really intense. There was a lot of building occurring, and we came in slightly over that, around 10.2 or 10.3. And then at the end of the day, you know, the building, there were some pretty challenging unforeseen conditions, particularly with the building's foundation that we had to address through contingency. But all in all, it's you know, stayed relatively on track budget-wise.
We did build it throughout the pandemic, and that was a bit of a challenge, but it all worked out. Doing a lot of the site supervision in that virtually, but it actually worked pretty well.
It's actually opening in 2 weeks. It's very exciting to see, to be a part of.
I have a question in terms of like priority, just because we do have like varying size architecture firms bidding on this project. I'm just curious, like, you know, what type of priority this project would be in terms of like your overall, you know, project portfolio, as well as like how much time, you know, various project leaders would be, you know, spending as a percentage of their overall workload.
Sure. This is actually coming at a really great time for our office. We just completed some bigger projects that are now going into construction. So we have several larger teams that are contracting. And so we have some great availability through the fall. And really, you know, I think we'd be wrapping up before the end of the year. So you would be very well supported. And as Bob mentioned, we have a lot of personal enthusiasm for your project. We love these kinds of puzzles, as he put it, and it's the right mix of sort of old and new, and really trying to figure out what is the right thing for your community. So we really look forward to an opportunity to support this study.
Tina can tell you, I personally attended the site walkthrough, and I was found the whole thing unexpected in terms of the topography, the quality of the original building, but also the complexity of this 1975 edition. So we went away thinking, wow, this is a really interesting puzzle. But we all became totally enamored with it, and it would definitely be a pet project in our office, definitely.
Yeah, I have to say, we're a pretty small office, or 5 or 6 people, where, when we take on projects like this, we're all in and get both principal attention, both of us, the two principals. And I have to say today it was very interesting. One of our staff members kept texting me that she saw that we were interviewing for this and she was so excited because I guess her family lives in Stowe and own the original Randall Hale house, I guess, or live in the Randall Hale house. And so she feels intimately connected somehow. so
I just
Legacy.
add to that, similar to what Lisa described. I mean, we take great pride at Design Lab and how we've structured our studio and our practice, where senior level partners, like Marianne or myself, I mean, you'll see us from the start of the project to the end. It's something we take great pride in, and it's something we really genuinely enjoy. We like to see projects through from start to finish. We like to be in every meeting and working through every detail, challenge, and all of that, and then seeing the construction process realized. It's just inherent to how we practice.
And we appreciate that one of our critical roles as architects is selling this project to the town and town meeting, and incorporating as much support as we can, possibly from various community groups and organizations. And that's a process we're really familiar with, making that pitch very convincing for town meeting, or at least giving you all the materials to do that. And that includes very persuasive illustrations. Marianne will have me doing watercolor renderings for your library edition, which are always a great selling point.
I have another question relative to that, and that is how you talk to the residents to understand what they're looking for, and how Tina and I are in the same space. Sorry.
So you have to fix that for us too.
You both muted yourself.
I think the question was,
So you're muted.
Okay, we're not tech queens here. So it's a small space. We have lots of people with lots of different thoughts about what the library should be. From people who loved the library when, I'm sure there's some people who knew this before 1975 that are still alive and have thoughts about the 75 building, much less what we might do to it now. And so it seems like in Somerville, you may have had the same challenges. I don't know what the total square footage there was, but how do you talk to people to really winnow down what are the key things you want to make sure you get into this building so the majority of residents feel satisfied with what you present as the final idea?
It's a great question, a really great question. It involves a lot of collaboration, I think, in planning, with us and then the future building committee on how to frame all of that. But we considered a number of different prompts. We started talking about the vision of a library and what the West Branch Library meant to the community before we ever started talking about any design ideas or program ideas. We just went in there to start listening. And I think that's really important for a number of reasons, but most importantly, to start building trust, from the community members. It's, really benefits from kind of an intimate process where you're in a space together, you're talking about the library, you're looking at it, you're hearing from people, all of the stories, going there when they were kids and how they grew up and how it evolved. And it's about listening first and foremost early. And then, even before you present program ideas or design ideas, what we like to do is we call them emerging themes or emerging priorities, and we start to kind of categorize them. And we actually, for Somerville, and we've done this on other projects, higher ed projects too, we kind of present those back to the community and say, hey, did we get this right? And we can do interactive exercises where we ask people to rate things like, does this seem right to you? Would you rearrange things? We get a lot of feedback that way. that we can then start to package, vet with the building committee, like, what do you guys think about this? And then start to present design ideas. So we really just want to bring everybody along in the process from the very beginning, and first and foremost, start out as listeners.
It's fair to say we had all those challenges with Somerville. We couldn't provide everything that came up in the community, but we definitely got to a strong consensus and a strong idea of what was most important and what we needed to prioritize, and we got that to fit into the budget, despite all the other building envelope challenges and site challenges and all of that.
Can I ask another question if other folks aren't?
Yeah, please.
I'm just curious, like in terms of like when you have your subcontractors come in and stuff like that, are they working like with the director? Like how does that get supervised and overseen like within your project team? Like are you, Ben, as the project manager, like are you on site with the various subs, or is it just like they go and they meet with Tina, or like how does that work in terms of?
No, we would always be present. Myself, as a project manager, I'd be orchestrating and organizing all of that, with the building committee's input. We would, and maybe we could pull it up, Marianne, but we have a whole proposed work plan. I mean, our first effort with you all would be to establish a work plan, what makes sense, establish meeting dates, what the goals are for those meetings. And then, facilitate tours with all of our consultants to get them out there. And we would be there a part of that and kind of orchestrating the whole thing.
Okay.
Would it be helpful to go through the work plan, or does that answer your question?
Yeah, that answers my question. Like we do have that as part of your, as part of your proposal. I was just like curious, like how, like if you are having an engineer there, like how many days does the engineer have to, be on site, and how, like we're, the staff at the library is pretty small. So I just
typically, I mean, we'd work with you guys, but typically what we try to do is to make it efficient for your time, of course, and try to organize a site visit where, we might be there for half of a day or maybe a little bit more, and our engineering team is kind of cycling through. So we spend some time with our structural engineers, some time with our mechanical and electrical engineers, some with our, if we need to look at envelope issues, whatever the case may be. And we try to do that if we can manage schedule, all in one day, so that we're not out there for half an hour here or an hour there and doing it piecemeal. We're really kind of planning it out with you guys.
Yeah. And I will add, to the extent that you can make available the staff that kind of intimately know where the curses are, it's helpful to have a good tour guide to say, don't miss this. We know, you live with it and you understand it much more intimately than we will, because we're not going to be there every day and see everything. And so that oral history is so valuable, and we'll do our best to sort of record that and understand it, and supplement the reports that were done previously. And obviously there's a lot that's probably happened in the intervening years, so we want to make sure to capture all that too. So we would ask for that kind of participation.
Oh, you'll get it. Be careful.
We're used to it. It's good.
So Tina, you've been living with the building for a while. What do you like most about it, and what is your greatest challenge?
Ooh, I think making the staff comfortable, that we really have no staff workspace. And I understand that in a small library that only checked out books at one point, that worked. People came in, they worked, and they left. But we do so many more things now. And it's really imperative for staff to feel like they have a place and that they work there and they can go and work off desk and accomplish other things like programming and everything else that we do. To that vein, Lisa brought up how you would present it to the town, and I'm sure you've encountered this too, where there's still a lot of people that think we just do books, whatever that means.
Yeah.
And to make it, not to be cliche, but a 21st century library is super important. I mean, the first thing I did when I got here was change out 10-year-old computers. So, technology is a big thing that we don't have, I mean, you saw it, the old building, and we were having issues with Wi-Fi, just Lisa and I tonight trying to do this. So, but in terms of the building, I mean, I love where we are right now. You saw the old historic building. I love the idea of returning the original entrance. I think that would be great. Yeah, it's just the workflow. What we've been trying to do all pandemic is figure out how to put everything to make it just easier for people to use.
Yeah, it does function now as two completely separate buildings, and the integration and the flow between the two was never successfully accomplished with the addition, and that's a tragedy. But I think that's totally possible, and again, I think that could be done within the footprint. We're kind of intrigued with the possibility of building more two-story space on the existing foundation walls and exterior walls. And we've done things like that before. That's one option.
I mean, I agree with that. I don't think that, and this is my opinion, that we necessarily have to have this bigger library to do what we need to do for our community. We just need to figure out how the space we have can better function. That's the way I'm looking at it. I mean, obviously, if we could get bigger, not necessarily bigger, but better.
And that's the first step, actually, in our design process. What can we do without adding anything? How far can we get with that? And then scaling up from there. Some addition or some more major renovation to see what that provides. Because we know it's helpful to give you small, medium, and large as a starting point, because there's a cost threshold with each of those, and that's going to be an issue with the town. There will be a certain breaking point that that you don't want to go beyond, because it's important to do something and not miss it because you reach too far.
Right.
Brian, do you have any thoughts, any insights you'd like to share?
I'm sorry for you see me making faces. I have a 2-year-old in the other room.
Oh yeah, these guys know how it is. I barely remember
Yeah,
that.
did you hear the stomping over my head? My 4-year-old is running around.
And I'm at my in-laws for that very reason, because they're not here. We get it.
Actually, I used to live just outside of Davis Square, so I was I saw the process of everything that happened in Somerville with the Somerville branch. And I'm sort of ashamed to say this, I didn't actually know about the web portal until you guys just mentioned it. Do you have, and Somerville is a very technologically forward-thinking community. Stowe is not.
There's moving there, isn't it?
We have as many farms as we have people. How do you drive interface with a community that a significant portion of it isn't tech savvy?
Yeah, good question. So I think it's a little hard to imagine, because we've been in the midst of the pandemic for the past 15 or 16 months. But if we were able to host actual meetings in person, I think there's much to be gained there. Because all sorts of different folks and technological abilities will be able to attend those. But we also did some pretty rudimentary things, which I didn't really articulate, but we posted surveys in other civic buildings, so City Hall, and Somerville has multiple branches. There's a central and then an east and west branch. So we put surveys in the other branch libraries, so that people could fill out and put in in a box, and then we would collect and sort through the responses. So there's different ways to do it. And it's too bad about you not knowing about the sort of website.
That wasn't your fault. I was working on a PhD at the time.
Well, I'll say, Somerville is technologically advanced, but it was also a little encumbered, because I imagine, they had some, community outreach departments and communications departments. They had a robust mayor's department. And in a way, that kind of bureaucracy sort of gotten in the way with this really getting out there. And I actually see the advantage of working with the community like Stowe, where, we can just make sure, like, hey, Tina or whomever, like, let's get a blast out on your social media sites, and like, let's link to something. There's so many websites that we can design and use to survey, and like, you guys can just blast it out, have signs in the library. There's all sorts of tools to use.
Yeah, I have to, and I'd love to underscore what Ben is saying about, sort of the time that you're embarking on this is amazing, because being able to go through the summer and the fall and to have people actually be on site is incredible. And I think it wasn't with the Somerville Library, it wasn't until really the end of the process that we were like, you know what, meeting in like various municipal buildings isn't working. And we need to get people on site and to walk them around the site and to stand there and talk about the issues and what we were interested in changing. And then it was like suddenly people's eyes lit up and they got it. And it was like, oh, I understand.
I hate to cut you off, but we're running out of time. So I wanted to thank you all for coming tonight. I really enjoyed seeing the designs and hearing from all of you. So,
well, we love your library,
Likewise.
and we love to work with you. So thanks for inviting us.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
great night.
Okay.
For
You
having
too.
us.
Thanks,
Yeah.
everyone.
Take care.
Have a good
Good to
evening.
meet you
Care.
all.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for running point on some of those questions, Lisa and Kat.
Yeah, no worries.
I can't help myself.
That's why you're on the team, Lisa. Keep us
Scarlett-
organized
Yep.
and on task.
Scarlett was informed that
Tina just
she
ran to
was
the
done with
restroom and then we'll
movies.
let the group in.
Yeah, Scarlett was informed she was done with movie time. And there was some shouting right at the beginning of Q&A.
My daughter's having her first sleepover ever tonight. She's only 4, but
My deepest condolences.
right. Well, I'm actually like, it's so quiet. I'm like, yep, you can take her.
So like, there's that, you're in that, I feel like both of us are in that wonderful window where like quiet isn't bad yet. It's like quiet is no longer bad and it hasn't circled back around to bad again.
Right.
I made lemon bars today.
They're all here. Look, what did I do?
You want me to let him in?
I just did.
Oh, there you go.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
Evening.
Thank you for coming. I'm Tina McAnder. I'm the director of the Randall Library. And I have several of our building committee members here. I have Lisa Lavina, Kat Copeland, Brian Pituto, and actually Jim had to go to another meeting, so he's not here. So I guess before I have you introduce yourselves, we're going to record this for members that couldn't be here.
Sure.
And with that, I'll hand it over to you guys. Welcome.
Well, we're delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting us. I'm Ken Best. I'm a principal with DRA, and I will be the principal in charge of the project. I'm also a historical architect, so I'll be handling any preservation issues relative to the building. Ron? Oh.
I'm sorry. I'm Ron Polillo. I'm project manager from DRA.
And I'm John Buell. I'm a principal at Foley Buell Roberts and Associates. We're structural engineers.
I'm Courtney Southwick. I'm a project manager with DRA. I've been with DRA since 2009.
And that's the team that we have with us today. So if you could, actually, I had hoped that our cost estimator would be here, but she's on vacation. So was unable to attend, but.
I also just wanted to mention that the other person that you may not see, but Carol was on the building committee for a long time, so she's a guest tonight listening in, so.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Carol.
Good evening, Carol.
Would you like me to share my screen, Ken?
Yeah, are we ready to proceed or?
All
Okay.
right.
Yeah, do that.
Please let me know if you see the full screen presentation, or if you're seeing, hopefully you're seeing the, the right window.
We are, yep.
Okay, great.
Okay. Well, we'll jump right into it. We've been working on libraries for many, many years and have a tremendous amount of background in it. But I thought we'd start off with just a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about tonight. And we started off with the team. We'll talk about a little bit about process, past work, some of the options that we thought about relative to your library, and a little bit about the schedule and the conceptual estimating work, and then leave time for questions from the committee. Okay, so this is our team. You've got photographs of each of us that are here, and then other people we have, as I mentioned, our cost estimator Lee, had extensive experience all over New England and actually beyond that on all manner of projects. Then we have Crowley Engineering and Fuss & O'Neill, who are mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection engineers. Their role is a little bit limited. They'll be evaluating the building and recommending some systems, particularly for the sustainability perspective. But their role is somewhat limited because it's a preliminary phase. And then Berkshire Design Group, who will be exploring any issues relative to the site and what's being proposed. And then John is here as well, as he had mentioned, our structural engineer. Yeah. In our, we talked about approach in our submission to you folks together with a schedule. And this is basically a sort of a diagram of that approach. We've kind of opened it up a little bit more, where we've taken the initial phase and made it into investigate and document, where we're really gathering information, documenting the building, investigating conditions on the building, what things might need repairs or where there are potential problems. Then we move into the assessment. So we've gathered information. And actually one thing in documenting, we do have a licensed drone pilot. He pilots from the ground, but he's a drone pilot. And so that's going to be really helpful when we get to look at the outside of the building. We can sort of look at the roof areas from a different perspective than one can see from the ground or from a ladder. So the assessment, we get into any historical data that you have, all the information we gathered, and start to figure out what the possibilities are, how the program might fit into the building. And then we move on to develop, where we start to look at design options. We have a sustainability meeting that you would be a part of to talk about strategies that might be incorporated into the project. And as we produce design options, we'll get a comparative cost analysis on that. And then as those get finalized, we'll have a more detailed cost estimate. And then lastly, just to incorporate everything that we've gathered, we'll put together reports as spelled out in in the RFQ, but also reports that we will be providing in addition to those with our recommendations well. But the whole focus on this is to show that each of these areas overlap. And the center of everything is the collaboration, that we will be working very closely with the committee and also town officials to make sure that we're fully understanding what your needs are and what the issues are within the community, so we can provide you with the best possible information.
This is the Grafton Library, which is a current project we're doing in Grafton, Massachusetts. It's a similar project. It is an addition renovation to an original building constructed in 1927. The team of consultants and designers for this project is the same team we're proposing for your project, with the sole exception of Fuss and O'Neill and also the estimator. But all of the engineering consultants and landscape consultants used in this project are the same team we're proposing for your project. So I'm going to walk you through these images very quickly. We look at the upper left corner, upper right corner. The brick building to the far right is the original library. And we were challenged with adding to this building but not making it an identical replica of a historic building. So what we did was we created a bookend at the far right, at the far left. Excuse me, I have a little trouble with my left and right tonight. I usually don't do that. But it's a similar material, similar design, but we kept the centerpiece, different material, and still a more traditional design, as the local historic district commission had requested that any elevation seen from the street have a more traditional look to it. And if you look at the diamond tile in the middle, those gray marble tiles were taken from the original stacks of the building, reshaped, resurfaced, and repurposed into the entry of the new building. And at the upper left, we're looking at one of the interiors of the bookend, the new bookend, where we kept a more traditional style for the interior finishes and space. And the picture below that is actually the connecting corridor between the two bookends, which is a more contemporary space. We added a large skylight to get a lot of light into the space. And then in the middle, we look at some of the exterior spaces and the landscaping that was done. And in the bottom right, that is the children's outdoor reading area. And if you look at the next slide, thank you. This is the new bookend. It doesn't mimic the original building, but it's very much in the same material, same style, and it creates a nice balance to the original building. And in the final slide for Grafton, which is next, we again look at some of the exterior spaces. Those two doors lead into, the ones with the gray wall, lead into a large community room, public space, that they plan on using for all sorts of programming, including the small kitchen for either catering or cooking demonstrations. And just outside is a nice patio that they can use for outdoor events that also ties into the children's reading area at the back. And if we look next, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, okay. So a few more projects. These are ones that have been completed. But this is in Ludlow, the Hubbard Memorial Library. It was a lovely little building that we had to add on to. And unfortunately, the only land that was of any size was in the front of the building. And it's such a neat building that none of us wanted to add on to that side. So we looked at what could be done in the rear of the building. And that's a little postage stamp piece of land. And the addition that you see in black and white that's about as big as one could get on that piece of land and still meet the setbacks. So it actually is 3 levels. There's one fully above grade that lines up with the original library, one that's partly below grade that lines up with the original library, and then there's a whole stack area, adult stack area below that. Unfortunately, that lower level doesn't have any windows, but it was a wonderful opportunity to use motion sensors to illuminate the space. So if nobody's down there, most of the lights are off. And then as people move into the space, the lights come on and stay on for a bit. We use traditional materials on the addition, brick, brownstone, and that was carved in similar detail to match the original building. We have a slate roof. We did some nice brick detailing to set it off from the original. The brick arch on the gable end on the side there, on the left-hand side of the picture, is filled, instead of a window, as on the original building, it's filled with a basket weave brick, just to set it off from the original building. And this was actually a nice project. We got a wonderful letter from a prominent architect at the time who wrote saying he was very nervous about what kind of building this would be, and he was delighted with the finished effects. And that actually was sent to the press, not to us. One that's from a size standpoint, this is probably the closest. This is an expansion of the old Lyme Library in Connecticut, in a beautiful historic district. The original building is 1898. There was a children's room off to the side at a different level. And in order to make way for the addition, we demolished that children's room, and we kept some of the features from it for use in the building. For example, the elaborate entrance door we used as the door to the children's room inside the building. We connected the addition to the original building with a colonnade that's set back from the face of the original library. So there's a definite separation between the two buildings. And then on the interior of the original building, we found the leaded light sash that were hidden up inside the wall that came down over the original circulation desk. That circulation desk wasn't going to be there, but we put a low wall in there, closed those. I had all the leaded windows restored, and actually on the side at the back wall of that alcove area, we wanted to make that a room too. So I made up some rectangular leaded windows, and so that becomes our local history room, and where the arch windows are is a quiet study room. So it was just a nice way of incorporating some of the early elements. North Adams, this is a larger project. This is 28,000 square feet. But I noted it because it was the first LEED certified library in New England, which is, it was pretty cool, particularly for a building that was constructed in 1865. So there was a lot of interior work. We did do some brownstone restoration on this, but mostly the focus was on doing the addition, which again, being in a historic district, they wanted some similarity between the two. So we used the mansard roof line at the top here. The original entrance had an arched slate roof. And so where our new entrance is, we have an elevator next to it. So we chose to put an arched slate roof on that too. So the two entrances have a similar feel. And then the connection between two buildings is separated by a wall of copper just for a strong break between the two.
Did you already mention, Ken, that this one has the ground source heat pumps?
Well, yeah, it has solar panels on the roof, and actually has an open well ground source heat pump, which you don't see too often today. Most of them today are closed. But this one, we actually heat the building with one well. It was pretty remarkable. This one, again, we had a tiny little building. It's outlined in orange, was the library. And in the back of that was a brutalist concrete addition, which provided no flexibility for the library. They couldn't do anything with the space. There was all kinds of issues with it. So we ended up tearing that down and built the library. Now, for the footprint that we had a bit of a challenge in fitting it onto the site. We had the parking in the back, and so we thought we would create a rear entrance as the primary entrance off the parking area. And we had the driveway coming in along the side. So that started to form the idea for the back of the building. But on the front of the building, there was this magnificent tree that we decided to keep and build the building to follow the tree line. And the tree survived, fortunately, the construction. But it was a nice way to connect everything together. And it also means that the front wall of the original building faces one street, and the front wall of the new addition faces the other street. So it was a nice way of kind of connecting everything together. A smaller project, a little bit smaller than your library, in Hollis Social Library, 1910 front portion with a dome roof on it. And then we added on to the back. And what's interesting about this project was the site, the very, very tight site that we had. And here's an aerial view. We put a red line which approximates where the sight line, the property line is. On one side to the west, we have a playing field. And because that was a playing field that was never going to be built on, we were able to get a variance to build right up to that property line. So we didn't have to worry about a setback on that side. And on the other side, we had the driveway coming in, and the driveway starts off on the next door church, starts off on their property and then crosses onto the library and then back, and the parking lot in the rear is where the septic system went. So just a very tight, challenging site for that project.
And this is the Scranton Memorial Library in Madison, Connecticut. Madison is a shoreline community along the Connecticut coast. It's a similar project to the Grafton Public Library in that if you look to the right next to the tree, that is the original building that was constructed around 1900. There were two additions done to this building. That little one is in 1960. And you can't see it from here, but there's another addition behind our new addition that was done in the 80s. And here we wanted, it's similar to Grafton in that we wanted to make the building compatible with the existing architecture, but not mimic it. And one of the reasons for the masonry facade on the new addition was to carry on the memory, so to speak, of an adjacent building that was taken down in order to create space for this addition. We also relocated the Scranton House, which was built in the 1860s, I believe, Ken. And it was originally the town's post office at one point. Well, we relocated it to accommodate parking and also the wells for the geothermal system, but it's still on the site. And in the next slide, this is another view of the addition that we did. Again, keeping with materials that are appropriate for the area, being a shoreline community. You know, the board and not board and bat, but the clapboard siding, but with a more contemporary look. And some interior images on the next slide. Thank you. In the top center is the original building, which we had cleaned the masonry professionally. We also added back the limestone steps and the black torchères that we had refurbished. Those stairs had been taken out at one point during the renovation. And although we did not reuse that main entrance, we considerably opened up that facade. There was a lot of tall plantings that you really could not see that part of the building from the street. It was difficult. We really restored it to its original intention and made it very visible from the street. And on either side, you see two reading rooms that are in that original building. In the 1980s renovations, they painted it with colors that were contemporary at that time, but not necessarily appropriate for the space. So we brought back more traditional colors. We removed the surface mounted lighting that was, again, from the 1980s, and replaced it with concealed LED lights in the cornice. And we also, if you see in that top of the left-hand picture, there's a stained glass ley light. There is a skylight above that for daylighting, but we added lighting in that interstitial space so that at nighttime that stained glass is illuminated. On the right-hand side, you'll see a mosaic floor. That center medallion is not original. There was originally a cast iron grate that had been removed at one point and filled in with concrete patch. I believe they had an area rug over it. We got rid of the area rug, we chipped out the concrete, and we had a tile installer work with us on a design reusing some of the existing mosaics from around the border of the room and created that design. We also had that mosaic tile cleaned. And it really came out, I mean, they just did a fantastic job. The installer was just wonderful for that. And in the bottom picture, you can see at the very bottom, the original building. To the right is the 1980s edition. And then in between the original building and the new building is, of course, the 1960s. But you can see a massive skylight array that works in tandem with the geothermal to almost take this building off the grid. They're generating enough electricity and geothermal heating and cooling that they almost don't need a fossil fuel boiler. It's really an amazing what they did with the engineering on that. And I believe this is the children's area. This is part of the 1980s edition. We, of course, opened up the space, lower shelving, some very comfortable seating for parents and children, beautiful daylight. And if you look at the far back, that mural is a custom mural. There's actually 3 sides to it. And it was custom painted by 3 different artists selected by the owner. It was donated by the parents of a child who had passed away, who was an avid reader. And we were able to make use of that little nook as a quiet space for children to read. And in the next slide, you'll see the new edition off the back. This is the adult stacks. But if you look to the left, That is the original facade of the 1960s edition that we, of course, cleaned, refurbished as much as needed, and incorporated it into the design of the new wing. So we were able to tie the two buildings together very nicely. A beautiful 2-story atrium space with skylights. And in the next slide, you'll see on the west elevation, a very nice open sitting area that we worked with of course, with the library staff and owner to lay out the different spaces. And we have some floor to ceiling lighting at that reading area. And as I mentioned, this is a coastal community. They're not very far from the shoreline, and you get some beautiful sunsets through that west window at night. It's really a gorgeous space.
So Ron and Ken talked a little bit about some work that we've done, and we did take a look at the current site, and we wanted to show you all what we're calling site options. The first one is actually looking at interior renovation, interior reprogramming, really. So there's different levels of work that we could do depending on the program requirements and the budget for both of these. So looking at making ADA upgrades and then potentially reinforcing different existing building floors based on the current condition. We know that the original building is 1890s. We know that we have a 1975 addition. So there would be some structural implications for the different levels of renovation that maybe John can touch on for a couple of minutes.
Yes, like in option 1A, if it's a level 2, that's sort of a more minor renovation with little structural work involved in that. A level 3, where you're renovating and altering over 50% of it, that gets to be more structurally complicated. We'd be reinforcing floors. We'd have to address certain seismic hazards and such. So that starts to get into a little bit more cost, but all doable.
Next one that we've discussed, and I know that this has been investigated previously as well, is maintaining the existing 1890s building and then look at redesign of the 1970s wing. So we think that there's opportunities here to make it more efficient, to redesign, reprogram, incorporate new elevator shaft, new stair shaft, kind of make everything accessible. And this would also allow us to utilize all floors of the building, which I know was something that was hopeful to be used. It's, Ron was able to look through that space, and it is a space that we think has possibility for reuse with this site option. So this is all maintaining, the site itself is very small. So both options 1A, 1B, and 2 are utilizing just the site. And there are some challenges even with redesign and using the footprint of staging and phasing that would have to be done for those two options. Looking at, oh, sorry, go ahead, John.
Oh, okay. And structurally on this one, you'd build a new addition to meet the new code. You'd separate it structurally from the original building. And in that new addition, you could design for whatever load you may need, if you need stack loading and that type of thing. You would probably have to do some work back in the existing building, because when they built the current addition, they sort of tore apart that adjoining wall. So you'd have to sort of restore the integrity of that line to make it function as it originally did. So, but other than that, the addition will be very straightforward.
The third option that we're looking at is a little bit more costly, only because we're looking at potential land acquisition, and what we're calling this is partial land acquisition of the adjacent abutters property. So this would have to involve negotiations and cost associated with that. But what this does is this allows you to open up the east side of the building and really gives you more opportunity to really make a big difference in the program areas that can be accomplished. You can renovate the interior of the existing building, but also expand with new programs that are suitable for today's requirements in a library. So this looks at just taking a portion of the site that's adjacent to it. We know that there's a historic 1700s home that's been added onto a few times adjacent to that. It's an opportunity, and that also has a relationship with the church. This is actually something that I really love about this site, is that you're right next to this church. And I don't know, I haven't dug into it enough to see if, parking is currently shared. I'm assuming that, there's a good relationship between the church and the library in terms of resources. So this is an opportunity that I think would be nice to kind of engage. And then to go one step further, we actually looked at this pie in the sky option. And what this does is it has even more land acquisition, and it's very ambitious. I think someone used the term ambitious when I described it to them earlier. But what I love about this is we involve what I like to call a pedestrian friendly access path. You could actually bring traffic through here only for parking purposes. And also this could reinforce and be an amenity, not just for the library, but also activate that church area, bring opportunities for them to share those zones, and then also just be an asset for the neighbors there as well. Like, how great would it be to be able to go walk into the library outdoor activity zone, reading area? You can have several programs here. And when we draw these lines, we're just, kind of spitballing here on opportunities and paths. This is not anything that's definite, but it's just a concept. And what I'd like to kind of show you for those paths, we're thinking something like the Dutch Vlinderf, which they're actually all over the place. You see them in New England, and it's more about, it's not an asphalt paved path, it's a pavers, it's porous paving. It's something that we actually have to think about anyways with tight sites for infiltration. But, this is nice because it doesn't allow traffic to go fast, but it allows pedestrians to walk down and kids to be in the area. And it just would be a nice opportunity for, like I said, for the library and then adjacent sites as well. Just really, really supports all of those spaces.
And then a little bit on sustainability. We're kind of running at the end of our time here, but just a few things that we might look into is porous paving, rain gardens for absorption of water. Radiant floors are wonderful, particularly for children's rooms where they might be sitting on the floor. Daylighting, if we were to do a new addition that gave us more opportunity to get daylight into the building. This is actually a part of the plan. It's part of the Grafton Library. We've got a team patio with an activity lawn associated with them. Team patio's got a little fire pit on it, and this activity area, and then it turns into gravel, and we have tiered steps going up the side with vegetable gardens planted in it, and that gravel area continues onto a water feature. So there's a lot of different activities that can occur in one space. And this was, if we do end up with an outdoor activity library in Stowe, this might be the kind of thing that we would look at. And then lastly, a little bit about the cost estimating. We're going to be, as we're designing preliminary approaches, Lee will take a look at our designs and give us a comparative budget for each one. So you can look at them and compare which is the cost-effective approach to take, or which will give us the best benefits. And then as we get down to the end, there'll be a lot more involvement of the committee and the team in discussing systems, materials, that sort of thing, so that the estimate is much better defined and more reliable, and then it will be projected out to whatever distance you'd like to go. And just a few references here from some of our past clients, and I just want to thank you for this opportunity. and open for questions.
Great, thank you very much. One question that I have at the outset is, if working with the 1975 edition is part of the equation, what challenges do you anticipate running up against where where the original building meets the 75 building?
Well, I think that's an area where you've had problems with water getting into the building. So one of the first things that we're going to do is do a detailed survey of that whole area. If we were building a new addition there, then we would have an expansion joint that runs through that entire area. And yeah, through that entire area. And we would, incorporate all the correct flashings and what have you. I think one of the challenges you might be having is the fact that you've got a paved area right up against the existing building. And I don't know whether that's where you've had leaks in the past, but that's what can be a challenge, because you're trying to build a flush condition from the patio area into the building. And so that's, that could potentially be a problem, because you don't have adequate space for flashings, particularly at doorways. So yeah, a lot of investigation really would occur along that particular line.
I had a question about like the priorities of the project, and kind of like how you guys see, like, percent of time that would be dedicated to this project. Like, is it something that you have time for in the foreseeable future, and that kind of thing?
Yeah, we're actually fortunate, because the Grafton Library is just about complete. And so Ron's been working on that. And so that will free up a lot of his time. I've been the principal, and that's, my time on that is somewhat limited. We do have a small library project that's moving into construction documents, but that's a very simple project. So we absolutely have time to jump right onto this and move it along.
Yeah, we have the time and the staffing available for this project.
Yeah.
Right, I'm coming off of a project as well that's ending CA very soon. Mm-hmm. Administration.
Now, there are the three of us from DRA, but there are, we're a 30 to 35 person firm that we have a lot of resources to draw upon for a project like this. So it wouldn't just be the three of us necessarily. We'd be your lead main contacts, but there are a number of people working with us in addition to the consultants.
And I guess along those lines too, like for those like consultant days, is one of it like, so say you're sending, the engineering team out or something, would one of your like project managers be there as well as the engineers, or do they just kind of go and then they report back to you later? Or how does that all work?
No, on a particular instance, we would probably all be out there together reviewing the building. Engineers get to the building a lot quicker than we do as architects. So they're, it's very easy for them for us to be there while they're looking. John might spend a bit more time, particularly if we're looking at, potential for structural changes, just so that he fully understands what's going on. And the other thing too, our cost estimator will be out with us too, to look at the building. Once we have drawings, her work is pretty easy, but unless she understands the building, she's not going to cover everything. I mean, like the condition assessment on the existing building, if there are repairs that are needed, it's good for her to see the extent of those repairs.
And I saw that, like, so you mentioned in the beginning that like you're using like a different cost estimator. Like what like have you used her in the past, and like is this like what's the prompting to the change from the last project you guys have been on?
Yeah, I mean, she's done a lot of really huge work. If you look at her resume,
Yeah.
the thing I like about Lee is that I have a lot more conversation with her about the project than I've ever had with others. For example, that small project I mentioned to you, the Coventry Library, which is just going to get going soon. It's a tiny little library, and we budgeted it before COVID, and suddenly, wood prices go up, steel prices change, And so our first discussion with her, once we get the go-ahead, is going to be, what do we build this out of? What's our best choice of material to build it? So she's not coming in after every decision has been made. She wants to be in on the front end and part of the decision-making process, so that as a client, it's going to greatly benefit you, because, I'm not going to design something that, if we've got a choice between, let's say, wood studs and metal studs, before we put pencil to paper on that, we want to know what our best option is relative to the pricing of those materials. So having her in early and being able to call her up about any, we're thinking of using this material, what's your experience with, has really been wonderful.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, we did like that you had kind of an iterative approach to like having the cost estimator involved in various points, because we can't make decisions without knowing kind of the costs as we go along, because that really
Right.
the town's going to do. So we appreciate that. And so it's not just like a plug and chug into like a spreadsheet of cost per square footage, but she also does more.
She does more than that. Yeah. I mean, I think the initial estimates that can, when we're trying to flesh out the schemes, she's going to use a relatively simple form so that we can compare one scheme to another.
Yeah.
So we can, for decision purposes, but once we kind of get the schemes, then it will be a little bit more detailed.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I have a question about the replacement of the 1975 edition. What would be the net change in square footage?
Oh, I mean, that could be, it could be significant. I mean, I think one of the things, we haven't really got into a lot of the zoning regulations, but instead of, we might be able to change the footprint. We might be able to get a little bit closer to some of the property lines. We can take a whole new look at the patio area out in front. And also the entrance, there's a lot of space involved in the entryway into the building. And I think one of our goals would be to make the building more efficient. Right now you've got a lot of 3.5-inch diameter columns throughout that area, which have to be, a real burden when it comes to flexibility. I also think having the limitation of floor loading up on the upper level has got to be a real limitation too. And if the upper level could be, more fully utilized, even if we pick up half of the patio area, that would make a significant difference to how you distribute the occupants of the library. I mean, it seems to me right now you've got, the shelving on the lower level and the reading on the upper level. And it would be much better if the two of those were working together as opposed to being, primarily separated. I can't give you a square footage, but it's an idea that we feel should be looked at. Just even if it's to say it's not going to work. But I think, when you're doing a feasibility study, the more options you can look at, the better the study will be, because they're relatively easy to do. At least the concepts are easy to accomplish, but the end result could be significantly, a significantly improved library by exploring those options. I mean, we're just throwing things out at this point, whether we can get land next door or, are there other things that you've talked about? But I always feel
it's not, oh, sorry.
If you don't explore it, then it's just one thing you've left undone.
I mean, in my opinion, it's not just square footage that we're gaining. We're also gaining opportunities to make a really efficient building, to make it more engaging, to kind of activate the spaces around it. 1975 construction is a lot different than what we do today. And so we look for a lot of different kinds of opportunities and views outside, and just ability to engage those spaces and make sure that they're working the way you need them to work now, not the way that they worked in 1975.
So it sounds like one of your sort of more general commentary on is that one of the significant challenges of Randall is not necessarily just the land usage, but also the restrictions that the 1970 edition poses to potential redesign of how the library is laid out.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think if and correct me if I'm wrong here, John, but I think if it had been designed for library loading, it might be a little easier to work with. But you have such a barrier to flexibility. And one of the biggest things that we aim for in libraries is flexibility, the ability to change the direction that things are going or move things around as demands change over time. So, you've got this big burden of an inadequate structure, I'll call it. And if that can be improved significantly, that's a huge improvement for the library.
I'd like to follow that up with just one question. Throughout your presentation, a lot of the parallel buildings or similar buildings that you mentioned, you used an approach of not mimicking but honoring the architectural style that you'd previously used. Is this a situation where you'd also apply that sort of methodology, assuming that we were to scrap and rebuild the 1970s section?
Well, a lot of the direction, I like to think that we listen well. Okay, in Madison, the intention there was to do a totally different character on the addition, to separate it from the original historic. And one of the reasons is that the neighborhood was all clapboard houses. Everything was clapboard in the neighborhood. We don't have a picture of that here, but it was clapboard. And had it not been for the historic building that was where the brick addition is, we probably wouldn't have ended up with that brick wing. But basically what happened, there was a 2-story brick building there that it just could not be incorporated into the library. The floor of the library would have been in the middle of the upper windows, that sort of thing. And somebody had donated a large amount of money to preserve that front facade of that building. And they discussed it with them, and he said, well, if that was a brick, if we put brick in the same location as that building, we would, he would still give the library the money. And so we did, because we had the three different buildings, we had the original building, the 1960s, and now another brick building, we felt that it made sense to kind of say, well, this is the library too, even though it's more contemporary materials. And that's kind of how it ended up. We used the traditional windows, the same sort of limestone detailing, but then we put a large window in the middle on the upper level to say it's not as old as the other two are. So that was the sort of philosophy behind that. But we listen to our clients. I mean, every town is different. Grafton, where we've got a more traditional building, it's the Mass Historic gave the authority to the Historic District Commission, and they wanted a traditional building. And so we had to sort of work with them on that, and we've got more sort of contemporary design in the rear of the building where we could maximize the window openings and bring more light into the space. But, we had to work with them. So it's really, I think sometimes it's important to have something very different. And other times I don't think, that little library in Hollis that we just looked at, that could have been a modern thing, but it's such a small community and there's historic buildings everywhere. I mean, that's kind of what they wanted. It's New England, and unfortunately, as an architect, I sometimes get pushed in the direction that it has to be traditional. So we feel that we can work well with our clients. I think we've got a lot of traditional looking buildings here, but we've also got some forward thinking ideas that may occur within those buildings. So our goal is not to do slavish copies, but to.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any other questions?
If I can just add on to that quickly, our philosophy, that philosophy carries to the inside of the building as well, where we work with you to lay out the space, to choose the finishes and furniture that complement the building and meet the needs of you as the end user.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Well, we're almost out of time. I really appreciate you making the time to come this evening and present to us.
And well, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. This was a presentation
do you
to
know
put
when
together.
Do you know when you will be making a decision?
I believe the process is we recommend several to our town administrator, who then makes the ultimate decision.
Okay.
We're hoping to do that within the next few weeks.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Well, we'd love to work. It's an exciting project.
It
So
really
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you
Take
very
care.
much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to meet everyone.
Thank you. Have a good
Yeah.
evening.
Yeah. Good evening. Bye-bye.
All right, I gotta say this, bonus points to them for building around a tree. That is not easy the structural concerns you have to take in for that, because you have to assume the tree is gonna undermine your foundation.
Or you're gonna kill the tree.
Or you're gonna kill the tree.
Yeah.
Yeah.